Hello, everyone, and welcome to Women in Identity Finding Your Champion series. Finding your champion is a great topic, one that I really like and always talk to my team about. And it started really when I was wondering why people were always asking me, who are your mentors? And my answer was like, well, I'm not sure I had a mentor in my life, in my career. But when I was thinking more about the step and the stages of my career, I realized I had champions, people that actually pushed me, helped me break down institutional and cultural barriers, people who were the true believers of some talents I didn't even know I had, and who literally pushed me in areas and opportunities that I didn't think I could do. So I thought it was really interesting to end the year in this note of finding your champion or identifying who your champions are, because the champion usually find you and you need to know who they are and work with them in order to benefit. So to help us frame this conversation, now that I have gave my own definition of a champion, we have invited a few women and men in identity. Some of them have been champions, some of them I had championed. And to help us moderate the conversation, I have my good friend, Laurie Robinson, who you have met before on a Women in Identity panel, joining us. So Laurie, I will let you take the lead.
Thanks, Juliet. As she said, I'm Laurie Robinson, and I am the Senior Director of Product and Market Strategy at SailPoint. And today we are joined by several panelists. We have Lorelei, Matt Mills, Katie Moses, and me, and I'm going to have them introduce themselves. So Matt, let's start with you.
Yeah, thanks, Laurie, and Juliet for including me in this. I'm looking forward to our chat here today. So look, I've been at SailPoint for a little over a year, and I am responsible for all global field operations, and I believe officially, title-wise, I'm the Chief Revenue Officer.
Great, thanks. Katie.
I'm Katie Moses. I am the senior manager here on our professional services team. I'm responsible for our global expert in architecture services business. I just celebrated my 8th year here at SailPoint. Started out as a technical project manager, and now I run our global expert services business.
Thanks, Katie. And now to our guest of honor, Lorelei.
Thank you for having me. I'm Lorelei Chernyshov. I'm Assistant Vice President at Merrick Bank, located in Salt Lake City, Utah. I've been working there about 3 years, and I am over information governance. That includes privacy programs, cybersecurity initiatives, and digital ethics.
Great. Well, welcome everyone. And again, thank you for being here. So let's kick it off with our questions. I'm going to start with you, Lorelei. As an executive, sometimes I think it's easy to forget that we've had champions along the way, getting us to where we are today, and supporting us and advocating for us. Can you talk a little bit about a champion that you've had and how you met them?
I will say throughout my career, I've had 3 different champions. All of them have been men. My biggest champion was at my previous position in another company. And I met them indirectly at work. I did not know him. I did not report to him. But I noticed in meetings that he was very skilled at navigating challenging situations. And he was able to dissipate tension so that no matter what the issue was, he was able to advance progress and in a constructive manner. I also thought that he had a lot of analytical prowess, and one of the key pieces to me is passionate curiosity. So because of that, I looked for someone with a level of professionalism that I admired and wanted to enhance in my own skill set. So because of that, I introduced myself to him and a few others, and then started a cadence where I would drop by the office once a week just to say hello, maybe have a specific question about a topic that he would know about. that would help me with the understanding as how that plugs in to the company strategy. So we ended up developing a rapport to that end. So in effect, I chose my champion.
Yeah, I love that you sought them. So that's great. Can you talk a little bit about how they helped you in your career and what are some of the biggest lessons you learned from them?
The biggest lessons I've learned is preparedness and timing. And to that end, that I am my own, each of us is our own entrepreneur. So, regardless of the position that I'm in that position, I'm offering a service to the company and to my colleagues. And then that service, how does it plug in strategically to the company objectives? So, understanding that that's my own business, I want to bring value, expertise, and relevancy. And how can that plug in to the other initiatives? So, definitely my own entrepreneurship, preparedness, and timing.
Those are great lessons. Thank you so much. Juliet, you also are an executive, and I'd like to hear from you. Like, what are some of the champions that you've had in your career, and how have they helped you?
I have champions pretty much in all of my position since the very beginning of my career. Actually, if you ask me who was the most significant, was probably the first champion because of what I learned from that executive. I was working at a consulting firm at that time, and he he just listened to me where I was coming with a very different idea of what needed to be done for the client who were serving at that time. And he did more than listening to me, just actually asked me to research it, come with a proposal, and then he brought the proposal to the customer and sold it to them. I never thought that somebody who was, an executive in the company or partner would listen to a young consultant and go all that way, but he did. And the lesson that I got was that I should never be afraid of giving my ideas, even to the highest rank in the company, because there was always a chance that it could have an impact. After that, in other companies, I did have champions, but what I noticed is that we're all risk takers. They would all look for, the things that may be unconventional. They will be comfortable looking for maybe more junior people in their team and see the impact that they could have with their fresh ideas. And I think this is kind of an attribute of a champion that is really interesting.
Yeah, I really love that idea because sometimes when you're not in a senior level position, it's difficult to take risk. So to find that champion who allows you to take risks and gives you that air cover, I think is super important.
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Matt, I understand that you're an ally of women in tech and of championship in general. Why is it so important to you? And can you tell us kind of your perspective on championship?
Yeah, you bet. Thanks, Lori. So I kind of come by this honestly in that I have three daughters. They're all out of school now and working. And I've been married to my wife, Karen, for over 38 years. And she was an executive at American Express. And look, we're a pretty close knit group, and we've been fairly active in our daughters' lives, and certainly they're providing the counsel we can in on their professional journey. So me personally, when I look at my career, I've been very fortunate to have had the opportunity to work with some really outstanding women. And I must confess, when I started this my journey, it wasn't a mission. I wasn't out to be an advocate, right? What happened for me is it just so happened that I was around some really, really talented young women. And, in my last company before SailPoint, half of my staff were females. And it wasn't because I was looking to advance, females in the workplace. It was because they were absolutely the best and the brightest and the best people for the job. And I think after the fact, they've added a ton of value, if you will, and diversity to the team. So it's been something that I think I've been pretty fortunate to have. But I will tell you, I didn't walk into it looking for something in particular. I think I've always just I wanted the best people to be to kind of surround myself with. Now, as it relates to being a champion, I think it's absolutely critical. Historically, I think I look back at myself. I've done a lot of mentoring, and a lot of that mentoring I look back. It's younger folks earlier on in their journey, right? When I think of how I've championed and folks that I have championed, it's been folks that are typically in my company, and being a champion, it's kind of a mutual thing, right? You're putting your reputation, you're kind of putting yourself out there. So you're fairly picky and you want to find the right people who, in your eye, have the right stuff. But, I say this even today, talent makes the world go round. And being able to take this talent and develop it and help it grow and have great success, I think that's a critical skill for a company to have, right? To be a best-in-class company, to be able to attract and retain and develop top talent. And I think the whole being a champion and having that process intuitive to the company, it's a huge, huge part of being great.
Absolutely. And I love what you're saying. I mean, I think championship does happen organically often. But now that you're on the other side of it and you recognize what being a champion is, are there times when you actually seek out an individual? And if so, what are some of the characteristics that you look for in a partnership, someone that you want to champion?
Yeah, this is just a fundamental belief for me. I think there's a ton of capability out there. I think, when I look at our company, we don't hire people that don't have capability, right? To me, it has everything to do with the want and the willingness, right? To be able to do what's necessary to have success. I think I talk about execution all the time. I talk about the grit and the grind of it all because I don't think it's all that glorious. I think it's just being able to show up and to be focused and to get it done and have an aspiration, right? To do something, be it giving back or it could be mentoring or being a champion, but having that willingness to really dig in and make a difference, I think is an inherent part of what I look for. And then once you start this process, now you're building, if you will, these skills and helping develop. And by the way, I think there's as much to do with what not to do and what jobs not to take and what opportunities to not take as it is, the ones to dive into. So I think that all of that becomes a part of, I think, the ongoing, champion protege kind of relationship.
Perfect. Katie, I'll maybe turn to you as Matt is describing. Championship is a two-way relationship, and certainly he talked about some of the characteristics he's looking for in people he wants to champion. But what about from the other angle, what should an individual who is seeking a champion, what should they look for in someone?
Sure. I would say look for people who you admire, who you look up to. You want somebody that you can connect with on a personal level, but also somebody who's further along in their career or higher up on the ladder, and has influence to help move roadblocks, or I think as you mentioned earlier, kind of provide air cover so that risk can be taken. I'd also say, don't limit yourself to one champion. And also think of your champion as someone who maybe can play multiple roles. They could be your champion, but they could also be a mentor or a coach in some different scenarios. So I think kind of that flexibility and especially, like I said, somebody that you admire, I think is absolutely critical as you're looking for a champion.
Perfect. As we've been preparing for this panel today, I've been thinking about my champions. And the thought came to me is that in some cases, they've been my manager directly, and in other cases, they haven't been. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think it needs to be someone in your direct line of reporting, or Can it be anyone within your organization or even outside your organization?
I would say, honestly, having somebody within and without your, inside and outside your organization is really helpful in multiple ways, right? Somebody that's inside your organization, knows your business, and may be able to help, help champion you within that. Whereas somebody that's outside your organization can kind of give you insight into other areas of the business for one that might help you with your area of the business, but also, maybe provide your name, bringing up your name or what you do to folks that you might not otherwise have contact with.
Yep, that's great. I think too, we're SailPoint and we're in the identity industry. It's a pretty tight-knit group and those relationships travel. But I think that's true across all of technology and security and all of that is you establish these relationships that carry on for years, really. So important. Laura Lee, I'm going to turn to you. Once a championship relationship has been established between two people, what is the role of the champion? What are some of the tasks that they can perform in that relationship to help build that champion up?
In my experience, it has been, I've been brought into executive meetings and asked to provide presentations, given specific projects or specific research tasks, and then brought in to present those results and recommendations. And that helped to plug into that greater strategic value and brought confidence in those meetings. You had the research to back it up, you could present it, and you could be part of those initiatives. So that was key for me to have that. Also, to take me out of my comfort zone, where if I'm working on in a particular area, I had been working in the legal department, and the CIO of the company had asked me if I would be interested in working on a project. So even though it was in a different division, it brought that opportunity and that exposure and an interest that I had in IT, which crossed those two departments. And I wanted to jump in on what Katie had mentioned as well, and that is that even if your direct report, if you're reporting to someone who's not a champion, that is not an obstacle, because your champions can be outside of the person that you report to, and that person will help you navigate those challenges.
Yeah, that's great.
Oh, sorry. I wanted to add something to Lorelei, the question you asked her, because I think sometimes people can be a little bit confused with mentor and champion. So when we ask what are the tasks a champion should do, it can look like advising and so forth. And I think we tend to look at things that mentor will be. My experience is, I don't know that my champions had a plan for me, but what I remember is that they would not come and ask me, would you like to be doing this or doing that? They were pushing me. And the reason why, I always noticed that they were champion is because they were the one pushing me out of my own comfort zone. Yes, sometimes I had ideas and I will present to them and they will take them out, but many times they will come and say, you are going to do this. And I would say, well, no, I don't think I can do it. I've never done it. And say, you can do it. And that belief in the person, in your champion, the champion as in you, right, will make sure I was going to do it, right? The willingness to not disappoint the champion, and also having this responsibility of the immense trust, that they had in me. And that just made me brave, right? As an individual, going to do things that I never thought I could do. So I think the champion, the main task is to push the person. If you think you see a raw talent that is not yet at full capacity, because that full capacity honestly can be limitless, push the person, push that person, even though there might be resistance at the beginning.
Yeah, and I think this is so important, Julia, in when we're talking about women in technology, because we've kind of been the minority, I guess, if you will. And sometimes in that situation, you don't necessarily have the confidence, right? And so to have somebody who is advocating for you and pushing you to do things that aren't comfortable. I mean, I think about my own mentors, and they about drove me crazy sometimes. I mean, I don't know how many times I told them, no, I'm not applying for that job. And they're like, you need to apply for that job.
Right.
So they saw something in me that I just didn't see. So I think it's so important to have those advocates who are pushing you and giving you that confidence. So I really appreciate that. Matt, I maybe will turn to you and ask you a similar question. As you have been being a champion, what are some of the tasks that you performed that were able to help someone in their career?
Well, look, for me, it's always been perspective, right? And helping them get to where they want to go, right? And look, I think it's reasonable to say that not everybody has an endpoint and say, over the next 20 years, I want to get to this. But it kind of goes back to, I just truly believe it's really, really hard to have success long term if you're not really, really passionate and having fun, learning, and all of those things, right? And so for me, I kind of make that a really big point of any kind of coaching, and because I do think perspective is helpful, and thinking maybe differently than they're used to thinking about things. So I think there's clearly skills you develop along the way, but I think that perspective, right? And I think, the idea of being a bit pragmatic in the journey. And then, the thing I push hard on is that you gotta enjoy the ride, you know? I mean, because if you can't and you're not, then it's not your thing, right? And I think that's just a big part of it. You gotta enjoy the ride, and I stress that a lot, to be honest.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too, as you're saying, when you build that kind of relationship, and we've talked about this a little bit, it lasts too. I was thinking, sometimes I just call up some of my previous champions just to say, check me. Like, I feel like I'm going crazy here. What do you think? And just to have that person who has always given me a new perspective is so important. Even now that we're not working together, it's important to have that kind of trust relationship where I know they'll tell me the truth, like, they'll call the baby ugly, as they say. So
I think that's right, and I think you learn how to do that, as a mentor and as a champion, right? You do it in a way such that it's received and kind of taken into context in terms of what you're doing, where you're going. And the other thing, Lori, that I would add to that is that enjoy the ride means you got to enjoy the ride, but it's especially today. Everybody, they want it all. Everybody wants it all. I want to have a great home life, a great personal life, a great work role and journey, and I think you can, right? It's just and I think that's kind of one of the things as the champion, and certainly as a mentor, right? That's part of these conversations.
Yep, is how to strike that balance, right? I feel like I'm lecturing my adult children on this a lot, and because I think the workplace has changed, and just to not let it consume your life. So I love that. Katie, I'm going to turn to you. I know there's a lot of people in our lives that we consider mentors and champions. I'm really referring to champions here, but one of the things that may be hard is because it's not a formal relationship, they haven't been assigned to you. We often will sit back and say, I don't want to bug them. They're too busy. You worry about approaching them. Do you have any tips for how someone can overcome that kind of self-doubt and begin to reach out more to their champion?
Yeah, I think for me, somebody who's in a leadership position was once in my shoes. They were early on in their career. They probably had champions that helped them along the way. And they probably want to help the next generation of leaders that are coming up behind them. I think, Juliet and Matt have certainly both mentioned that as well. it's in their own interest to continue making the company better. Since we love sailing metaphors here at SailPoint, I'll say that, all ships rise with the tide, right? It can be intimidating approaching someone that has an impressive title, but if asking them to spend some time championing you, it's going to be mutually beneficial, and hopefully make the company better as well. And at the end of the day, the worst thing that they can say is say no. So
yeah. A side story here. One of my champions, back in the early part of my career, he was my champion and he taught me everything I know, and then he left the company. Well, then he came back to the company, and when he came back, he was reporting to me. So it kind of goes around, like you say.
Yeah.
So that's great. I think I really appreciate what you're saying, is you do have to look at it from the perspective of, this is making me better, which is making the company better. And I think knowing that people really do want to reach out and spend that time with you. So Juliet, I have a question for you. We've talked a lot about championship relationships happening organically. And I think that's really important that they do, that you seek each other out and build that relationship. But I also think that companies need to encourage this kind of behavior. So can you give me your perspective on if they should happen organically, but also how can a company help encourage this?
Yeah, I think, because a championship is such an intimate relationship between two professionals, right? One really pulling up young individuals, like Katie mentioned. I do think that it feels like organic, but there are things a company can do, right? As Katie mentioned, it's really hard to go upward and ask the executive to help you. So naturally, we should have the executive starting to seek, the talent that they want to champion in the company. And I think there's some, training at the leadership level to basically be able to start looking for those talents. Sometimes we're so busy, right? We're doing tasks and so forth, but we don't, and we look at our first line managers, and we're usually, as executive, a very good champion of those. But we need to do more skip levels and just understand who are the talent that we have in the whole fabric of our organization to be able to be effectively those champions. So there's tools that a corporation can give. Instituting skip levels, not everybody does it. Even at SailPoint, where we do quite a bit of that, not everybody does it regularly with new employees to try to understand a little bit their perspective. But at the end of the day, you have to spend time with the person to understand what that person can do, and listen to that person and to their ideas before you can decide you're a champion. Otherwise, we go back to a mentorship program, which is a little bit more mapping two people together and then discussing how they can help. The championship is different, and honestly, it may sound easier to do within your own organization because that's where you know the people the best as an executive, but it doesn't have to. And what it means that you have to reach. I found myself being the champion of women at SailPoint that were not in my organization, just because we had that connectivity with women. But honestly, most of the people I'm championing are in my organization. And the fact is because I know them more intimately. So whatever the organization can do to create, more connectivity between the individuals is good. But I'm afraid that if we put too much of a programmatic thing around there, it will go back into a mentorship program that we all have, and it's very different in my perspective than the championship relationship.
Right, I agree. I think that the mentorship programs are really important, and sometimes you can grow a championship out of a mentorship, but I think that the championship works better when it is handled a little bit more organically and maybe rewarded by the organization and encouraged, right? Where You know, maybe you have an opportunity to list somebody who you are advocating for as somebody on a succession plan or something, where the business is getting involved, but they're allowing you to have that kind of organic relationship. And I'll say to you, Juliet, you've been a champion of mine since I joined CellPoint like 8 months ago. I never reported to you, but you were one of the first people to reach out to me. And it's super important because it helped me feel comfortable here and find my voice. So it's so important. So thank you while we're there. All right, I will maybe switch gears a little bit and ask Matt to talk about this from an organizational perspective and how you think these relationships can actually help improve the organization overall and frankly, improve diversity and help give people who haven't had the opportunity exposure.
Look, to answer your question, I think these relationships around the championship, right? And from my experience, these kind of have evolved for me, right? These are where I've had the opportunity to work with somebody, look at them as having potential, right? In a lot of different ways, not just skills, but somebody who has great aspiration, great passion, and is willing, as I said earlier, willing to put in the work. So I think these programs are hugely important. You know, I've said this many times, but talent has no boundaries, right? Talent goes where talent wants to go. And if you're in an organization, you have an organization that does not put forth the right foundation, right, to be able to grow and attract and retain and build this next generation of leaders, they won't stay. They won't, because they're going to go where they can get that and get that kind of nurturing, that kind of opportunity to grow, that opportunity to be around folks that will actually invest in them. So I think it's a huge part of a company's ability to attract and retain top talent. And I think it's something that for us, Austin, Texas, right? Cybersecurity, talent rules. And we've got to continue to invest to be able to make sure we get our fair share. And then, it's got to be some level of reciprocity. We got to give back, and we got to build this next generation of leaders. And I think good people, right? People who do things my version of the right way, right? Where you're giving back, you're being a mentor, you're championing, you're doing great things for the company, right? If you can figure all that out, and it's a mouthful, you tend to have good results.
Lorelei, I maybe would ask you the same thing. Can you talk a little bit about how you've seen championship support you in your career, but also how that has ended up benefiting the organizations you've worked for?
I would say the championship has helped in understanding, as it pertains to women in IT as well, is, there is that existing inequality and the wage gap and the glass ceiling. But what the champions have done for me is kind of underscored that your perspective is unique, and to focus on those differences, not try to become like someone else or try to mimic a specific skill set, but what you bring is unique. And how do you take that, keep your knowledge relevant, continually learning, and then how does that bring value to your position or possibly some other position? So I think that has been key for me in that place. How do I, and especially women in IT, where it's mostly a field of men, and I may be the only one, in my experience, the only woman in the room. So how do you bring your perspective, and while not accommodating sexist issues or sexist behavior, and how do you address that? And that has been the champion. And again, all my champions have been men. So I have brought those issues forward, and I have been pointed to resources on how to address that. I have been used my own personality to figure out how to directly address it, and then help to educate those that are speaking in that way. Excuse me. So I
Yeah.
can't, yeah, I can't underscore enough how much having a champion it really is critical, to your career or feeling comfortable, in your own shoes in your position at a company.
Yeah. I think too, from maybe building on the women in IT perspective, and kind of tying into some of what Matt was saying with talent management, is by having a championship relationship, it really does help promote diversity. And we've talked about different reasons why, but I certainly think that someone who is in a minority position inside of a company, to have that support from someone who can help carry them is really important. And of course that benefits the person, but it also benefits the company. So.
And, you know, oh, and just to quickly add, in my position now, when women come into the IT organization, um, regardless, no matter the level that they're coming in, whether it's a very junior level, whether they're in an admin, and a security analyst, I make a point to reach out to them, as you were explaining that Juliet has done for you, Lori, to introduce myself and let them know that I am available, to talk through any challenges they may have.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And I think it makes a big difference. And it starts to form those organic relationships. And sometimes, I'll be honest, sometimes they don't end up forming. There's sometimes when it just isn't the right fit, but that's okay, because if you keep reaching out, you'll find them and start to build them. Does anybody else have any other comments on this, and how, as we look at women in IT, and we have come a long way, but there's still work to do. What are some of the key challenges that women face, and how can these programs help them?
Yeah, Lori, I would just add, for me, I probably learned as much, being the champion, right, as my protege. As a younger executive, I mentioned earlier, I had a number of my senior staff were female executives, and I always thought I was being an advocate for them, speaking out on behalf of, my team. At the same time, right, they explained to me that sometimes it's not so great, right, because it can't be that we got our opportunity because we're female. It needs to be that we got our opportunity. We were the best talent, and I think that was right. I mean, I was speaking on their behalf, but sometimes it got convoluted into a conversation that was not intended, and it made me aware. And I go out of my way to not have that happen anymore. And so I've learned quite a bit. I think the other thing I would say is this: maybe not as an individual champion, but as a leader, right? When you see nonsense. Lorelei, you talked the last time we spoke, right, about a situation where somebody, over a course of a number of meetings, continued to cut you off, or I've witnessed that, and it's tough to deal with when it's happened to you, but when someone like myself sees it, I've got a responsibility to pull that person aside and say, hey, and bring it to their attention. And I think I think that happens more often today. I think people are aware, people like myself are aware. And I think you got a responsibility to make sure you're, I'll say educating or teaching or coaching or mentoring, right? Even folks that are unintentional victims.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think anytime you're advocating either for a specific individual or as a group, you are acting as a champion. And I think that's a champion for the cause, I guess. So it's really important. And we've talked a lot about champion relationships, and I've heard us several times mention, as women on the panel anyway, that our champions have been men. And I just want to point out that for me, in my experience working in IT and security, it's dominated by men. And so most of my champions and even mentors have been men. But I know, Juliet, I think you mentioned in a different conversation that you've actually had female champions. Can you comment on that and talk about the importance of females being a champion for other females?
I think, the reason why when we reflect on our champions, they were mostly males, because we're also working in an industry that, at the time where we had champions, which for me was 20 years ago, they were mostly men, right? But, it's a woman who was my champion that allowed me to be in this industry, right? I was fresh coming out of consulting, or still in consulting, looking to work in high tech. And I was interviewing to many, many companies, and everybody was telling me, well, you don't know anything about high tech, so why would we hire you? And when I was in front of this woman, was the CMO of Oracle at the time. She asked me the same question, and I was saying, here we go again. And then I basically said, well, for this role, you don't need really somebody with technical skill. You need more like a consultant. And she paused and she looked at me and she said, okay. And, I got the job. And at that time, I think, we created that relationship. I was clearly not a direct report. I was in her organization, but she has been my champion. And 9 months later, she did something very significant for my career, where she sent some of my work all the way to the CEO. And then I got transferred, almost like a job offer, into the product groups, which was really where I wanted to be. So I think that, there were not too many women, but she was a risk taker. She saw somebody who was not the conventional resume, and she took a chance on me. And then continue, probably by interest and intrigue, seeing how I was doing, and then continue to championship. And she literally launched my career in high tech. And she was a woman. After that, I left her organization and went into product organization. I found, and I was working for who I consider today my biggest champion to date. Just to give you an example how significant it was, of course, he gave me all the opportunities that I want, but at the time when there was no diversity discussion or anything, we're talking about 1997, 1998, that person, who's a man, literally did adjusted my pay. And I got, over 2 years, my pay doubled within the company. And basically, the way it was rationalizing to me is to say, well, you not paid at the same level as your peers. Now, all my peers were male. We didn't talk in those terms at that time, but for him, it was very important that because of my contribution, I would be paid at the same way. And I think that was the true definition of a champion that would push me. He was the one telling me, of course you can do it, just go do it, just shut up and do it, right? But he also was looking at my pay and, a lot of other things. And that is a relationship that is special. And I would tell my advice, if I can, Laurie, to a young woman, do not wait for a program for the company, right? Believe in you and look for those people that were going to give you the coverage, that are going to give you the leverage that you need. It always starts with you in anything that you do to put yourself out there. There will be men and women that will see the talent. Today, as an executive, my biggest satisfaction is actually to see somebody who a champion succeed. Right? It's a little bit like your kids, now going to college, and it's the same. It's a lot of the personal satisfaction in your work is to see those people succeed under you and with your help. So look for these people, in the organization. They are out there for sure. But they may not be your direct manager. They may not be somebody that you interact with every day, but look for opportunities to talk and find them.
One thing I'll add to what Juliet is saying is, I think there are things that as a company can do as far as, as pay and as, titles and things like that. But one thing that I think often gets overlooked is just having that champion there to really help you command the respect that your expertise deserves, right? I know that probably all of us have been in meetings where we've been talked over, interrupted, or things like that. But having a champion that is in some of those meetings that can, say, wait, hold on, somebody needs to finish, I think, means as much, if not more, than getting that title or getting that pay bump.
Yep, absolutely. Lorelei, I'm going to end our panel with one final question to you. Certainly, we've talked about the different aspects of a champion partnership. But if you had a piece of advice for someone who is would like to be a champion or to be championed by someone, what would you give them?
I would say to look at those potential people for their level of professionalism. What are those qualities that you would like to tap into or aspire to be? Then seek out those individuals. And I think Juliet and Katie mentioned as well, you look for those qualities first. That's number one. And then seek them out. Make yourself known, whether it's dropping by their office once a week and saying, hello, I'm so-and-so and I work in this department. And have a specific question, start a rapport. And then if that rapport is there, then you can start developing that championship relationship. It will organically emerge.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for participating in the panel today. I know I've learned so much, and I feel encouraged to go out and be a champion myself and look for my own. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Lori.
Thank you
Thank
for having
me. Thank you, Katie. Thanks,
you.
Matt.
Thanks, everybody.